The most interesting thing about this new £2,000 streamer is something it hasn't got. There's no DAC inside it, no analog to digital converter. Unlike almost every other streamer, that means you can't just plug it into your amp and hit play. It needs a separate DAC to turn the signal into sound. And no, that's not a mistake. Eversolo did this deliberately. Now, if you're the sort of person shopping for a £2,000 transport, most likely you already got a proper standalone DAC that you love. So when you look at something like the T10, you may think, what's that kind of money actually buying me? Is it the engineering itself or the software and the day-to-day ease of use? With that in mind, let's take a closer look. So here's the idea behind it. Most streamers try to do everything in one box. They pull the music in and they usually convert it to analog with a built-in DAC. The T10 quite happily skips that second half. It's what we call a transport, and its whole job is to take your music from platforms like Tidal, Qobuz, or from a drive full of your own files and pass it over to a separate DAC as cleanly as it possibly can. That's the job. Now obviously that only makes sense if you already have a DAC worth feeding, and at this level that almost always means a proper standalone DAC, one that you've chosen and spent real money on rather than one that just happens to be built into an amp. That's why Eversolo have left it out and put the money into bits that actually matter for a transport instead, and that's the trade you're making here. Now you might be thinking, if all the T10 does is pass music along to your DAC, how can that affect the quality of sound? And it's a fair question because on paper the digital signal leaving this thing is identical no matter which transport it came from. But here's the part that's easy to miss. A DAC doesn't just take the digital signal and turn it into music, it's quite sensitive to how the data actually arrives. So that means the timing of it and possibly a little bit of electrical noise that can slip through. If that timing is a bit jittery or there's noise leaking down the cable, your DAC has to work harder and you can actually hear it. Things like a bit of harshness in the treble, or you might get a soundstage that won't quite settle. Get it clean and steady and the DAC just relaxes and does its best work. So a good transport isn't changing the music, it's making sure it's not the thing holding your DAC back. And that really is what your money is going towards. So we think that the fairest way to judge the T10 is pretty simple. How seriously does it take that one job? And when you look at where the £2,000 has gone, it's all pointing at exactly the same thing. So let's take the clock first, because on a transport, the timing really is the heart of it. The T10 uses what's called an OCXO, an oven controlled crystal, so it's kept at a steady temperature and barely drifts. And Eversolo quote timing accuracy right down to the femtosecond. What that gives you is a very low jitter, and low jitter is what holds the image steady so you get a focused three-dimensional soundstage rather than a slightly smeared one. It's genuinely the biggest reason a proper transport like this pulls ahead of the streamer built into an average all-in-one. And if you're someone who really cares about clocking, they've gone a step further. There's an input around the back for an external master clock taking 10 or 25 MHz at 50 or 75 ohms. So here's why that's actually clever. Every digital component keeps its own time, and even a really good clock can drift ever so slightly. So when your transport and your DAC are each running their own clock, those tiny differences between the two turn up as jitter. But feed them both from a single master clock and they lock onto the same reference, so the whole chain is working from one source instead of two that are almost but not quite agreeing. Most people will generally never plug anything into that socket, and the internal clock is already excellent on its own. But if you want to take the system all the way up to true reference level, that's the door it opens. Eversolo have their own C10 precision master clock on the way to do exactly that. We don't have a release date quite yet, but it's coming, so there's room to grow into it down the line. Then there's the power, which is just as important. At the heart of it is a custom toroidal transformer wound with oxygen-free copper, feeding a proper linear power supply, and the noise floor sitting somewhere around 20 to 35 microvolts. So it's very quiet. And that counts for a lot, because the cleaner the power going in, the less rubbish ends up riding on the signal coming out. On top of that, the inside of the unit is physically split into sections. Power in one, the digital circuitry in another, and the whole display tucked away on its own. That way, the noisier parts can't interfere with the sensitive ones. It's the sort of thing you'll never actually see with the T10 sat on your shelf, but it's a big part of what you're paying for. There is one thing worth pausing on though. The outputs aren't all created equal. The I2S that's on an HDMI style socket and the USB will both pass the full resolution, so DST-512 and PCM up to 768 kHz. But the coaxial, the optical, and the AES top out at 24-bit at 192 kHz. So if you want to get those top numbers out of it, you'll want to be connecting over I2S or USB. However, if your DAC only takes Toslink or SPDIF, don't worry, it will still sound lovely, you're just not getting the very highest figures. We believe it's worth knowing this before you buy rather than after, which is why we've included this in our review. So whichever output you end up using, they are all electrically isolated. So any noise knocking about on your mains or your network can't just ride down the cable and into your DAC. There's a 12 volt trigger in and out on there as well, so the T10 can power up and down in step with your amplifier. It's a small thing, but a lovely one when the whole system wakes up together. Networking has been given the same care. You get a 2.5 gig Ethernet, dual band Wi-Fi for when running a cable isn't practical, and, this is the interesting one, an SFP port for fibre. That's a bit of an audiophile trick, run fibre into it instead of copper and you completely break the electrical connection between the T10 and the rest of your network, so none of the copper-borne noise can find its way in. Most people will be perfectly happy on Ethernet, but if you're chasing that last bit of quiet, the options sat right there. The rest of it is everything you'd hope for at this price. On the front of it, there's a big 8.6-inch touchscreen with the choice of proper analog style VU meters, a variety of spectrum displays, and even a few ambient bits if you fancy them. A little campfire and an aurora light styled scene, which sounds a bit odd reading on paper, but generally looks lovely across the room. It's now Roon Ready, so it slots straight into a Roon setup, and you've got all the popular streaming services like Tidal, Qobuz, Spotify, Apple Music and more, all searchable in one go rather than app by app. And you've also got the Eversolo app on your phone that will mirror the whole screen over your network so you can control everything on it from the sofa. It's an easy to use app, you can get gapless playback so albums can flow the way they should, shuffle across your entire library, and you also have the option to upsample everything on the fly up to 16 times, which some listeners claim to smoothen out the sound a touch. There are 2 internal SSD slots taking up to 16 terabytes, so if you prefer it, the whole library can live inside the box and skip the network altogether. And if you've still got shelves of CDs, you can plug a USB disk drive straight in and rip them as WAV or FLAC files into the T10, either on those internal drives or across to a NAS. It's also worth saying the T10 gives you a proper set of tuning tools and they run across all the digital outputs. There's a full parametric and graphic EQ where you can adjust high and low pass filters, loudness and dynamic range compression, and even channel delay if you're time aligning things. Now plenty of people will happily run the T10 dead flat exactly as it comes out of the box, and that's completely fine, but if you like to tinker, you've got a nice variety of tools. And there's one feature on top of that I do want to single out because it's done really nicely, and that's the room correction, which Eversolo call Evotune Pro. It's built in as a standard, it's completely free, and the best part is it all happens inside the one Eversolo app. There's no second piece of software to mess about with and nothing extra to buy. You run a quick measurement, it builds a profile for your room, and it will sort out any issues without much fuss at all. The only thing to be aware of is that you'll need to buy your own USB measurement mic as it's not included, but you can use your mobile or tablet's microphone. So here's the honest question that all of that leads to. What is your £2,000 really buying? Because if you already got a great DAC, which you probably do if you're looking at the T10, the lift in pure sound quality from a transport like this is real, but it's subtle. Which means that a big part of what you're paying for isn't only the clock and the transformer, it's the software, the big screen, the app on your phone, the library sat on internal drives, and the whole thing just being quick and easy to use on a day-to-day basis. I think you'll agree that for a lot of people, the experience is worth as much as the final few percent of sound. The trick is being honest with yourself about which of the two you're actually buying, because that's what decides whether the T10 is worth it for you. So, was leaving out the missing DAC a mistake? Here's where we've landed. If this would be your first proper streamer, then honestly, it's not the one for you. You'd be paying for a load of clever engineering that you can't fully take advantage of yet, and you'd have to buy a DAC on top of it. But if your DAC, your amp, and your speakers are already sorted and the streaming source is really the weakest link in the chain, then leaving the DAC out stops being a compromise and it becomes the entire point. Every penny's gone into the clock, the isolation, and a clean handoff, and nothing's been wasted on a converter that you're never going to use. Which really just leaves us with one decision: the T10 or the T8 that sits below it. The T8 comes in at £1,289 and the T10 comes in at £1,999. So there's around £700 between them. What that extra gets you is a better clock, the external clock input the T8 hasn't got, plus a larger screen and more storage. So if you know that you'll never run a master clock and you just want brilliant Eversolo streaming into your DAC, the T8 is a lot of transport for the money, and I wouldn't try to talk you out of it. But if you want the very best front end Eversolo make right now and the option to build a full clock setup later, the T10 is the one, and at least now after watching this video you know exactly what that extra is paying for. And honestly, the best way to settle it is just to hear it. We've got the T10 and the T8 set up in the demo room, so you're very welcome to bring your own DAC down, or you can use one of ours and put it up against your current streamer using music you actually know well. So that's the T10, a streamer that's better because of what it leaves out, as long as you've already built the system to hear it. The Eversolo T10 is available on our website at premiumsound.co.uk. Everything is linked down below, and if you're London based, do come and book some time with it in our listing room. Thanks for sticking till the end. Don't forget to hit that like button if you found this useful, and make sure you've subscribed to the channel and enable notifications so you don't miss the next video. Go ahead and let us know in the comments what you're currently running and whether the Eversolo T10 would be a good fit for your setup. If you're not quite ready to decide, check out our playlist right here for some of our other streamer overviews. Until next time, happy listening.